Hello and welcome again to the Conscious Aging series. We are quite at the end of the season 5. This time here we have an English episode still, and next week there will be one in German about dementia, which we had already similar with the same person at the beginning of this series. But today we have here Sharona Hana, and we want to talk about creating conscious, intimate relationships in the third act. And I think we are in the third act, so it's I'm very curious about you, what you are doing, and what advice or what wisdom in regard of dating maybe, and how to create these relationships you can give to us. Sharona, I give over to you, and maybe we first start by you telling us a little bit who you are, where you are, what you're doing, why you are interested, and so on. Okay?
Thank you, Heidi. Well, hello out there in the world. I don't know where everyone who's listening to this is from, so good morning from Boulder, Colorado. It's a beautiful spring day here. And and I want to thank you for inviting me on this, Heidi. Our original connection was through the integral world, and I've been fairly active in the eldering space. I convened a group of people just to start exploring what is conscious eldering at this stage of life. And I did that, as I do many things in my life, is when I'm curious about something, I try and, get a bunch of people together to talk about it, or really take an observer's point of view on what I'm experiencing, and try to, as we say in the integral world, make myself the object of what I'm looking at. So in other words, not just be involved in being an elder, but take the perspective of, okay, what's that like? And what's it like now? And what's changed now? So I've been doing this for a while, and it becomes kind of second nature. So when I found myself single again last year, I decided that I would take that on as a project as well, and be in careful observation about what's arising for me as a single person and what I wanted to create next, and that's taken me down some really interesting avenues. So I'll say that this started for me as a question about dating. How was I going to date consciously? But very quickly, the topic expanded from dating to creating conscious, intimate relationships, which is a much, much bigger field. It, first of all, it injects consciousness, which was always part of the equation for me. And then relationships became plural. It's not like I am suddenly looking for the one, which is kind of out there in culture. How am I going to find my soulmate? How am I going to find the one? But rather, how am I going to use this vehicle of relationship for my own growth and development at this stage of my life? So just to say something about my own perspective on this topic, first of all, I'm female. So there's going to be a little bit of a natural bias in that. And I'm American also. And having been raised in America, I'm tracking a lot of cultural trends that I notice that are present for me in this time, but also things that I've lived through in the past. I think that wherever this audience is located, I believe that there have been parallel cultural trends, but some of the things that I might have that I might mention may be very unique to my American perspective, and right now I have no way of knowing that, but I'm definitely speaking to that. Also, I'm speaking as a single person, and I believe that a lot of what I'm coming up with is actually really valid for people who are already in relationships who want to take a new step or a different level in their relationship, or just find themselves at this stage of life and going, okay, what now, even within an existing relationship. So all of that's online in this conversation, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, thank you. I don't think we have to explain what third act means, but who has coined this name, this word?
I don't know who coined it. I mean, it certainly comes from the theater world, where the third act is usually considered to be the final act. But from my point of view, the third act is just the third act. It's there. I believe there's a fourth act too. I certainly intend there to be a fourth act. So let me start there and talk a little bit about what I understand the third act to be. And there are a lot of different names that people are coming up with. It's starting to emerge more and more in literature, and people talking about second adulthood, third act, you know, and what I've been calling eldering, which is a very distinct stage of life, I believe. So, you know, it doesn't go by number, but I would say that it probably is someone who's over 50 at least. And the main characteristics to me are that you've passed the stage of life where your focus is perhaps parenting, mothering, or in your career path, you're becoming something. You've got this energy to achieve and to you know, in the life path, there's sort of a stage that I believe is in the 30s and 40s, which is career oriented, family oriented, and around the 50s, some of that energy dissipates, and you don't become less energetic, but it sort of stabilizes. It just sort of you've done that, and it's like, what is there now? What's left?
Yeah.
I think actually a very pioneering stage at this particular time in culture. So even though people have become 50 and 60 and 70, you know, for years and years and years, obviously, at this particular time in this culture, we're arriving at that stage with more energy, more life force, more possibilities than have ever really existed before. And you know, the paradigm for aging has changed in our generation, and that to me is probably a few generations that we have. You know, I think we're probably speaking to people within 2 or 2.5 decades of each other. And so you know, the model that my parents, for instance, grew up with was, you know, you kind of hit this your 60s, you look at retirement, you know, you golf, you cruise, you volunteer, you know, and then you become you're grandparents, and then you become infirm, and you go into assisted living, or what, you know, whatever is set up in that structure. And certainly, unfortunately, that's very much an American paradigm. And you know,
yeah, but it's the same more or less here. I think it's still the same, only that the span has gone ahead. Before with 60 you were old. Now the same maybe will start with 80 or the end of 70s, that that you begin to really, you know, feel different, and maybe before something, yeah, here and there is something which you feel, but our belief system has changed since we are the baby boomers and the ones who come a little later, you know. So in the 60s, they have really changed the way of thinking about life. And the people who were then in the forefront, they are now old. And they don't accept to be old.
Yeah, well, and it's true. You know, we do have a much longer lifespan than even, you know, our parents' generation, and a longer healthy lifespan. So, you know, the years that are added to life are not added at the end of life; they're added now in this third act. So it's really a very vital time, and you know, I think that it's really offering us new opportunities that that haven't necessarily existed before. And as I said, it's pioneering. So, there are models that are in place that we get to question and see if they are indeed the right models, and if they need to be changed, well, maybe we're in a position to change them, actually. So I'm sorry, were you say something?
Yeah. What exactly do you talking about? Which models would you like to see changed?
Well, thanks. You mentioned the 60s changing everything, and I do want to just sort of take a little historical step back and recognize something about our generation. And certainly I'm going to be speaking from my own perspective. So I was born in the 50s, raised in the 60s, and became an adult in the 1970s. And what I recognize about that time, we recognize that there was a huge paradigm shift. If you are familiar with integral theory, we can say that the postmodern stage kind of came online full force in the 60s. But in my personal experience, I cut my teeth on feminism, and my college years were all around what was possible as a female in the culture. And but what I notice now, as I look back at that time, is that my imagination and my vision of what's possible was growing and expanding, but yet the way I was raised and my physical embodiment was very, very traditional. And in terms of the way I personally was raised, I had a mother who was from the old world. She was actually born in what was Palestine then, and a father who was American. So arguably, I'd say that my mother's developmental gravitas was in red to amber, so really warrior to traditional, and my father's was probably more traditional to modern. Okay, so more amber to orange. And as a result of that, I had no idea of how to embody or create the paradigm that was suddenly visible on the horizon. And I don't think anybody really did. So what I believe happened in that time was we wanted a new paradigm. We wanted, more of everything as women than what we had, and culture was coming together, and we made these stabs at trying to create new things. We didn't really know how to do it, and we didn't know what to make stick. And a lot of the things that we tried to do in communal living and the liberation of sexuality and all that, they were awkward. They were out of balance. We didn't know how to do it well. And a lot of those things that we dreamed of collapsed and really didn't happen. And so as a result, I think a lot of people of my generation ended up going to fairly traditional marriages in spite of that. And, maybe we made some little changes, and certainly they weren't exactly like our parents' marriages for a lot of reasons. But we didn't have this massive paradigm shift that we hoped for at that time. And, those things take a long period of time. So all of that has grown. So many of the same questions we were asking then, we're still asking now. And we see other movements that have come up, but, we get a chance to recreate them.
Yeah, I think we did the beginning. I'm more or less the same generation as you are. I'm also born in the 50s and grown up, but in Germany, where the traditional was still very, 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 very strong. And I grew up with, in blue or amber, as you say, this level of development with rules and ideas of traditional career. And a woman could be a teacher, for instance, but not necessarily a singer, as I became later. Music, that's not a profession, and things like that. And it is very clear that we had no idea where to go. We only knew that what was laid out for us as normal, we didn't want to do it. But still, when we fell in love, there was not really a big choice of what to do. You know, I married first with 19, which was also for me a way to get out of the family. Mm-hmm. And in those times, I was not even adult yet. You needed to be 21 to have your own bank account and things like that. And mm-hmm. even marriage had to be the consent of the parents. And this first marriage was a long time, 12 years, but I knew after a year I should have gone, you know. Mm-hmm. So for me, it was always this conflict, and I think many women in our generation had that. We try to stick to the old and try to do something new, and we are in this continuous conflict, not to know really how can we get these things together. We didn't want to renounce on relationship, mm-hmm. you know, and only do career, at least not me. And on the other hand, how to do that. You know, how to be different and have a husband or have a good life partner, you know. So we were pioneering that, and I think the generations now are already starting from that point which we have opened up.
Absolutely. Every generation is standing on the shoulders of those that came before, and it was really a critical time for that. Any American viewers here, and maybe it's available in Europe as well, I don't know, but there is a Netflix show that came out, I think sometime last year, and they only did one season, and it was called Good Girls Revolt. And it's a fascinating little series about, it supposedly takes place in the newsroom of a news magazine, i.e. Time or Newsweek, something like that. And it was of women reporters, but they weren't allowed to have the bylines because only men had bylines. And this was in the 1970s. And I thought the acting was very good. And as they explained the culture, they did a really good job. And when I saw it, I was fascinated because I could smell that time. It was so close to the time I was raised in. It just painted a perfect portrait of the culture at that moment. And I just thought it was just brilliantly done. So I offer that to anybody who's kind of interested or who recognizes what we're speaking about to just visit that and go, you know, you'll find yourself shaking your head going, oh yeah, I remember that. Oh yeah, I remember dressing like that. Oh yeah, I remember that hairdo. Oh, I remember men talking to me like that, you know. So just a little note there. So at the same time that's what's happening historically and culturally, marriage itself is changing, you know, and we are living in a paradigm of changing relationship. And let me just expand that out to not say marriage, but relationship is changing. Because mm-hmm. now, first of all, you know, marriage, get married, don't get married, it doesn't really make a lot of difference, except it still does legally. There's some tax implications, there's some privacy implications. So, you know, that's a legal level, and I'm more interested in the emotional and developmental levels of relationship at this point. So, you know, we know that in the past 100 years, for sure, marriage has changed from simply an economic partnership to a love partnership. You know, that actually is a very new concept in culture. And, you know, we've also gone from this life of, you know, being in a village where we had, you know, all sorts of people around us providing different aspects of our needs and of our living, to needing to get that from one person. And, you know, and so now the person that we're in a relationship with has to be, you know, not only our lover, our financial partner, our co-parent, our intellectual equal, the one who's going to support me in all of whatever it is that I'm going to go through, the one who's going to help me grow and develop the most. You know, I mean, it's a lot to ask of one person, you know, and yet we still keep trying to do this. And, you know, I'm finding myself feeling, as I have grown and developed, and as I have become more me and more certain of who I am, it feels more and more like threading the needle, trying to find this one person who can do all of this. So, yeah, so that's been a really interesting inquiry for me, and it has shifted my viewpoint from, instead of looking for who I want to date, I'm looking for what I want in relationship. And so that's kind of a shift of the perspective that I'm taking on this whole subject.
Yeah. That's really interesting. Yeah. And because before women were not so, how do you say, they didn't ask so much. And now women ask a lot, and men are not really, Mark always said the men are still behind. They are not up to date. So they often feel that as an overwhelm. But I should do this, I should do that, I should do that, and so on. And for men seems to be much more still the gratification when they earn money and can contribute and even support the whole family or the woman. That seems to be still for them a main way of being in life. While now we women wanted to support ourselves, but still it's good if you have a man there who, in case we don't make it, that he can do it.
I think that's a shifting paradigm also. You know, there's a brilliant man who maybe your listeners have heard of. His name is Warren Farrell, and he's been working in the, you're familiar with him, he's been working in the space of men's rights, so to speak, and his frame is that the men's movement's about 50 years behind the women's movement, and as long as men are seeing themselves as needing to be, you know, the away from the family and the one that provides the structure and the money, and also disposable in culture into the family, then we're never going to get the kind of parity that we're looking for women. You know, I mean, really, it's a men and women project that, you know, we really take on together. So.
But it's interesting, as far as I remember, he also says that at the end, women say they want a man who is sharing everything and housework and everything. But then when they do the polls, women are more sexually attracted by men who are strong and who really have a social status, and not much less attracted by men who are doing the housework. So that's also interesting to see. That is still our own old heritage of how we see our roles. And as you said before, we cannot expect that in 50 years things turn completely. I think it's a slow process of coming together and really co-create something and getting out of the pre-given roles and begin to be more flexible in the roles and find that okay, you know, and be happy with that. Yeah.
Well, so this is a perfect segue to what my point of this whole discussion is, because yes, perhaps all that's true, that's what women are attracted to, but the basis of that attraction, both I think you could argue biologically and culturally programming, is so that we can raise our families, create stability in our lives, you know, do all those things that really were important, or more important, I'd say, when we were younger than we are now, when we were, you know, when we had children or were going to have children, and what we needed to support a family was a front and center consideration. And that's the beauty about this third act. It's not a consideration anymore. You know, so arguably we know who we are. hopefully we kind of understand what our financial picture is, and we don't need to, you know, marry for financial stability, or, you know, we have whatever our projects are on that domain. And, you know, and so the opportunity of right now, when we don't have to think about those things, really opens the doors to a lot more, and to asking, okay, so what is important right now? And once we ask that question, then it's like, okay, so who is that person that, or those people that start to fulfill what our current needs are, you know? And they're not the same as they were when we were 20 and 30 years old, you know, or even 40. You know, I'm a serial monogamist. In fact, I have a little story that I'd like to read you, but I've been married twice, and, you know, in my second marriage, one of the primary reasons was because I had a young child who needed a father, and that absolutely colored my perception of my partner at that time. You know, I married a father for my son, and you know, so I don't have those needs anymore. You know, I'm not raising a kid, so now the third act is, you know, I want to say, in some ways it's more selfish, and at the same time it's much more global. So yes, I am very interested in serving this person, this body who's going through this lifetime, you know, and I'm also really interested in serving this time of life and other people and the world. We're in a place where we all need to step up to that. So I think relationship is one of those vehicles that can really support that.
It reminds me what you say, Barbara Max Hubbard, who says women are now stepping from procreation to co-creation.
Exactly.
Where we first took care for the family. I mean, I don't have children, but still, I mean, the normal paradigm is that you, as a woman, take care for a family, and when the children are grown up, in former times, you sort of useless, lost. But now we have the time to care for the world, to care for other people, to care for the world in the end of the day, you know. And that's also why I think that we need to figure out femininity, a feminine approach. Maybe in our age is even easier to the problems of the world, and take over a leadership which is a feminine leadership, and not try to, as we did in our feminist times, we try to imitate men. No, that's not what helps to liberate the the world from this agentic of this masculine way of driving forward. We need to find the feminine way. And if we can figure that out with a masculine partner, with a male partner, that would be perfect. Because
Is
then
we, cool?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
in many ways.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, the other thing that seems to happen as we withdraw our focus from the project of raising our children, or, you know, it could have been, you know, part of my earlier years was also building a business, you know, and that was another child. It was still that same creative impulse that was operating there. And it's still my energy now in the world, even with all these grandiose ideas about, you know, working in the world. It's a very different impulse. It's not, it is being in the flow of what's happening. I mean, it's a much more flowing state. And I believe that this aligns with the model of maiden, mother, and crone, you know, and I'm taking back that word as an eldering person, you know, the crone is she who embraces everything that's come before and turns it into wisdom. So as we are withdrawing our focus from our actual kids in the world, you know, and not to say we don't love them and we don't continue to nurture and do whatever it is that we do, but we sort of become more archetypically mother. You know, we are mother to we're grandmother to everyone. We're grandmother to lots of kids, and we're grandmother to a lot of projects. And as such, you know, the work, the labor involved is still that of the younger generations, but we are mentors. We are models. We can exist in our elegance and hopefully inspire. And in order to do that, we've got to really clean up our act. You know, we can't do it from the things we wish we had done or the failures in our life or whatever. We've got to really find our own presence to be able to do that. And likewise, find our own presence in order to create the relationships that support that.
Exactly. First, we need to clean up, when we call it like this, in our own life. And this is not an easy thing to do, because when we realize that all the patterns of before don't work anymore like they did before, we have two choices. Or we despair and get negative, or we do something out of it and try to find something new, which is inspiring, you know. Exactly. And I'm quite sure when you go into victimhood, and we all have the tendency to go into victimhood, that's not really too inspiring for anybody, let alone for people who you want to attract to be in relationship with you. So there is sort of a push into finding out another way, you know.
Exactly. Exactly. So if you don't mind, I would love to read a little story, and you know, it gets a little bit personal, but it has been such a driving force into this inquiry for me. So you know, I was going to kind of read this in the beginning, but we just kind of skipped back, but I'm going to circle back around to it. So if you'll forgive me, I'll go ahead and read. So.
Yeah, okay.
I'm 62 years old, and this starts when I turned 60 years old. I threw myself a big party. My friends and family flew in, and I hired a band who backed me up as I sang the song, "I Lost the Right to Sing the Blues." The lyrics go, "My stars are in alignment. My house is all feng shuied. I'm filled with peace and harmony. My bills have all been paid. I've let go of the struggle. You know, I've paid my dues. When life is this darn good, you've lost the right to sing the blues." It was a very happy time for me, and not only that, after years of being single, I was just beginning a new relationship. We had dated a few times, were intrigued, and reveled in each other's company. We hadn't had sex yet, but both of us saw it on our short horizon. When we did, just a few days later, it was explosive and marvelous and fulfilled the bursting expression of our recently celibate bodies. We delighted in it and just wanted to be with each other as much as possible. At the same time, I was moving forward as I had planned, looking for a home to buy, and after several years of renting, my intentions were strong, and it was only a matter of weeks before I found a lovely spot and was able to make the deal. I was in the very early stages of relationship, yet my friend was in between living situations, and we were getting along well. He had helped me in evaluating my purchase, and it seemed the most normal thing in the world that we should move in together. We told each other and others who asked, at this age, why wait? We also told each other that if it didn't work out, we would leave each other with love and respect. For a year, we had an amazing time, fulfilling all of the fantasies that had been built up over the previous years. We had wonderful conversations, we traveled to beaches and festivals, we drank coffee in bed, rode our bikes to dinner, and had beers and watched sunsets on summer evenings. And then the cracks began to show. He helped me with the small home improvement projects because that was in his skill set, but he didn't really want to do them. I created a beautiful home, shopped wisely, cooked dinners because those are things I know how to do well, but those weren't the things that he necessarily valued. We both started playing out roles that we had developed earlier in our lives, but neither of us were being who we foundationally longed to be at this time in our lives. Before too long, we did part company. We went into the mountains, we had a closing ceremony to our relationship where we enjoyed each other and thanked each other, and then he moved out. He felt free, and I felt alone, but we still honored our commitment to part amicably. Now, a year later, we're pleasant friends. Parting company was not easy. We had attached to each other, and coming apart for me was like pulling off a part of my skin. I went into a deep healing process that often looked like depression. I held my inner child that felt abandoned and unloved. I faced my future fear of no one showing up when I would need help and of dying alone. And after several months, I emerged. Now, with the clarity of hindsight, I can see all the ways that my friend and I were misaligned. It was not sexually, it was not in the things we enjoyed or the way we saw the world. It was far more fundamental for me. It was about me being truly authentic to who I am and not who I had shaped myself into in order to serve the relationship. Too often I feel we begin relationships by feeling that chemical draw and the high on the cocktail of dopamine and oxytocin of new love and contact and fulfilling our comfort, safety, and romantic fantasies. We then begin to morph into each other in order to keep the high going. Might as well face it, we're addicted to love. The knowledge I gained from the experience of breakup was this. What I was doing to heal from the end of my relationship is what I really should have done before beginning. It's the work that will make our relationship sparkle with the magic of presence because it will enable us to see our beloveds for exactly who they are and enable us to bring forward our best selves. So my inquiry now is how to create a new paradigm for a relationship that doesn't lead down a similar road. As elders, we all have a lifetime of patterns imprinted from our families of origin and from previous relationships. If we're not conscious of this, we're destined to keep repeating the same patterns with new partners. Following this thread has brought me to some fundamental questions about relationship itself, and particularly the primacy of monogamy. If my relationship is not based in my fears and insecurities, but rather in the desire of me becoming my best, brightest, and most authentic current self, how do I do that? And what is now possible? To be clear, I'm not saying that I don't believe in or want a monogamous relationship. What I'm discovering for myself is that this time of life is giving me more opportunity than ever to explore new ways of being and different potentialities that may actually better serve who I am and who I wish to continue to grow into, instead of who I need to be to fit into a pre-existing paradigm. So regardless of where I end up as a result of this inquiry, for me, it's a necessary road to travel to be complete in the quest for conscious, intimate relationship. So that was sort of a writing that was a backup for this conversation, you know, and I kind of wanted to put that out that, you know, I've been down this road and I'm not willing to go down that road again. I really want to do something different. So if I can kind of take it to the next step of, okay, so what do we do? You know, you mentioned, I'm going to share this little graphic because you mentioned this, this knowing that Ken Wilber articulated about how we develop. And so I got this PowerPoint. Do you see my screen?
Yes, but now it's white. Before I saw the graph.
Very good. Okay, so here we go. As many people know, the thing that happens to all of us in all of our lives is that we grow up, and this is, you know, our coming to maturity, all of the experiences that we have as we continue to grow. It is the path of our body that starts as a little child and becomes an adult and eventually disintegrates. So growing up is inevitable. Growing up happens to absolutely everyone for whatever length of time they are on this planet. And if you have a cosmological viewpoint, growing up is whatever the heck your soul is going to do in this particular lifetime. Okay, then we have the idea of waking up, which goes on this vertical line. And waking up happens whenever there is an experience that gives us a newer perspective, a wider perspective. It can come from a spiritual awakening. It can come from perhaps an illness or the death of someone that really just shakes you out of your current reality. It can come from psychedelics. It can come from an experience in nature. You know, anything can happen. And I'm going to assume that the audience for this particular talk is somewhere on that waking up scale. So they are experiencing an accelerated point of development. And as soon as you start waking up, then yes, as your growing up accelerates. Okay. So once you start waking up, then as you start to take more perspectives, and as you mentioned earlier, Heidi, you know, we all of a sudden realize that, oh my gosh, we've been living inside these paradigms, inside these cultural matrices or patterns that may or may not serve what it is that we actually want to create. And so we get to look back, and that is the area of cleaning up. And that is looking at our shadow, looking at our patterning, looking at our biases, looking at our traumas. Sometimes that's, you know, to really do that work, it may take therapy, it may take energetic clearings, it may take diving deeper into your spirituality, really working with a spiritual teacher. There's any number of ways to do that, but that's the work that has to be done in life, and for the sake of this talk, in order to create this new paradigm of relationship where we can actually show up. So this range of showing up is what I'm really diving into, of how, you know, how do I do that for myself at this point in life. So yeah, sorry, that's just little graphics that created. I'll stop that particular share at the moment.
It makes it very clear what is going on. That's really nice. Yeah.
Good.
And that you see that showing up is the final point, or the consequence, let's say, out of that.
Yeah.
And I can say out of my life, I see that I wouldn't have shown up like I do now publicly 10 years ago, 15 years ago, even 20 years ago. I wouldn't even have, oh gosh, no, never, you know.
Right.
But that's the good thing. When you get older, you come to the idea or to the feeling you don't have to lose anything.
Right.
You know? Nobody can dismiss you from your job because you sort of don't have a job like that anymore, you know, where you have a boss who doesn't like what you say and things like that, no? So you just can say what you want, and you can be what you want. And that's a big freedom of older age.
It is. It's a liberation. And in on this topic of relationship, this is where intimacy comes in. So, you know, to me, intimacy, I just feel like I need to give a definition, is being able to be authentic and vulnerable. You know, so it is not, you know, it's not sex per se, and a lot of people conflate intimacy and sexuality. You know, sexuality is a form of intimacy, but it is not the only intimacy. So when you're truly showing up, you're able to be intimate, and you're able to be present with whatever is really there, and be present with yourself. So in my own quest of healing that recent relationship, you know, I had to do a lot of cleaning up. As I said in that story, you know, I realized that my anguish was because I had an inner child that was screaming at me, and, you know, I really needed to do a lot of interior work with that part of myself. And, you know, I have different ways that I do that, but one of the things that I did a lot of was writing. And I have friends who could really support me in the process of this too. So what has occurred to me for people who are interested in creating a conscious, intimate relationship at this stage of their life is that there needs to be an actual process for cleaning up, and cleaning up the relational line specifically. So for me, that ended up being a lot of writing about all of my relationships. This is what happened. This is what my relational life was. And once I saw it out on paper, I could see a lot of patterns, and I could then see the origins a lot of those patterns. You know, why I have that, and you know, once you see them, they can't hide in the shadow anymore. You know, we can start to work with those energies and transform them, transmute them into something else. So I firmly believe that, as I said, you know, the work that I did at the end of the relationship is the work that I should have done at the beginning. So I think it has been an incredibly rich experience for me. And I was listening to a podcast just yesterday where the gentleman who's speaking on the podcast was talking about relationship, and he said, our question shouldn't be whether a relationship failed or not, but what did love teach us? What did love teach us in the relationship? And I think that that's a really integral perspective to take, you know, because, you know, I've always, I have, in each relationship that has ended in my life, I've always called it a graduation. You know, it wasn't a failure. It wasn't anything. It's like, okay, I graduated on to the next thing. So I think that it's really important to take careful stock of those things and to understand what worked, what didn't work, and what is it that we're really wanting at this stage. And in order to do that, there's a lot of interior work that has to happen. And again, this is pioneering for our generation. You know, our parents didn't even have a clue that they had interiors, let alone working those interiors and discovering, you know, I mean, if the word psychologist ever crossed their mouths, it was, you know, it was either some gossip about someone else or, you know, that someone was seriously mental ill. They would never think of, you know, trying to understand themselves better, let alone understand each other better.
Yeah,
So.
this also appeared only in the 60s, no? The therapy culture and the look inside of us. And it's a stage of development which is very, very important. And as you said, our parents didn't have that. Even if they wanted to, there was hardly anybody who could help them. Today, it's even too much possibility, and you don't know what to choose from and who to trust to help you to go into the interiors and figure out what things need to be cleaned up. And the other thing I wanted to add is I had this work already done before I met Mark. And then in our relationship, I noticed how these old patterns wanted to come in again. And so I observed them. Sometimes they came in and then afterwards I could take them back. Sometimes I could also not allow them in, but they are very, very, very strong. If you are not all the time mindful, we can say, all the time on the watch, they are just sneaking in like this. We have exercised them for so long.
Yes.
That even if we are quite aware, it's automatic. And I had with Mark an agreement about how we would take that. We would never take that as an offense for the other, but always take it back to ourselves and even say, oh, I'm sorry that, you know, that is my stuff. It's not your stuff. Or I tell you this for your information. It is not about criticizing and things like that. And he actually was much better than me in that. Wow. I sometimes entered back into my, oh, the dishes are not clean enough or things like that, you know. Yeah. So, yeah, but it was a great occasion to grow, which now for me, as he is dead, unfortunately, and thinking of a new partner, it has raised quite a lot my, let's say, my expectation to find a person who is willing to go on this journey together, because it's a journey, it's the individual journey for both, and it is a journey together, which is not easy, but it's really great.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and thank you for sharing that, because that's just, it feels incredibly encouraging. And one of the beautiful things as I started making this inquiry, I was visiting with a group of people who I didn't really know very well, but you know, it's just hanging out and talking to them. And there was a woman in this group who was, who I just found very interesting, and we hit it off. And she called me a few days after this event, and she said, "Hey, do you want to be my dating support buddy?" And I said, "Sure." I don't know what that means, but yes. You know, so we've actually been meeting once a week, and we are talking about things that are in the field of relationship, either our own experiences or what's out there, because, you know, so there is this interior work that we do, and you never get it done. You know, the waking up process is infinite. You know, you'll wake up however much you wake up in this lifetime, and you know, it goes on from there, as is the growing up process, you know, until this body actually stops, you know. So, and in fact, in a lot of traditional cultures, this process was already recognized, not so much in modern and postmodern, but in India, you know, they always talk about, you have your first life as a householder, and then your second life is when you go into the temple and you become spiritual. And so that part of us continues to grow up even as our physicality starts to decline. And that's the richness of this particular stage of life that we're in. So what I worked on with my friend is, okay, so we're doing all this work, but then how do we move forward? And I already was talking about cleaning up, which is all the writing that I did, and, you know, working things out with myself, with other people, you know. And I have a lot of guiding questions within that domain that I've developed, you know. And then we developed guiding questions going forward. Now, in a lot of traditional, well, not traditional, but let's say new age, how do you call in your soulmate? All these things, there's all this stuff about visioning, and, you know, all the things that you want, and, you know, that has some validity, but there's also, you know, the question of, now that I know this about myself, how is that going to play out in a relationship? Who do I need? You know, is it something that I need or not need? And then who's going to be the right reflection of that characteristic? So we've developed a lot of questions that that you could take to asking yourself about what it is that you're actually creating. And this is, in my world, it's a very feminine model of creation, because I really believe that if we are really truly being as real and as authentic as we can be, and agentic, okay, so that's we've almost thought of that as a male trait, which is, you know, kind of going out in the world, but you have to be in motion to do this. In other words, you can't sit here and pray on the couch and never leave your living room. You know, well, let me take that back. You can, you know, there may be a repair guy that knocks on your door someday and you meet your beloved, you know, but, you know.
Or you have internet. You can have
well,
internet. I met Mark on Facebook, so.
Well, and that's remarkable, you know, that's a remarkable story, but there's a lot that's happening on the internet that really takes us out of our authenticity rather than brings us back to it. You know, I mean, the whole idea of dating online is you create a profile, which is a good self-inquiry. But what I found for me is, okay, it's the snapshot of who I am today. And I'm never going to create that profile if I'm feeling shitty today, you know? So we all have our, you know, our bright, happy sides, and, you know, but that's not, boy, there's a lot of people to filter out from all of that, because everybody's happy on the internet. Everybody is great, you know, and you look, you go, oh yeah, I don't like that, the way that person looks physically, or they used a word, or gosh, they can't spell, or, you know, whatever we're doing, we've got these filters that are not of our own making, and that we can't control, really. We're just looking at an algorithm someplace. I've actually been here in the Colorado area, there is an online dating service that's called Meet Mindful. And the intention of that service is to arguably attract people who are more on a developmental path. But I've been talking to them, and they have found that in spite of their best intentions, it just doesn't work. So what they started doing was creating mindful meetups where lots of people could meet face to face. And the fact is that we meet people when we are with them and not online. And, you know, it's awfully tiring to say, okay, let me try this out. Let me try this out. Let me try this out. You know, I mean, dates take time, and it takes time to even get to a place where, you know, you want to go out and, you know, and it's like we're forcing ourselves into a very small bottle to try and, you know, it's kind of like having tunnel vision, to try and let's go down this tunnel for a while and then let's go down this tunnel, rather than showing up.
Yeah, and what I want to say, I agree with what you say, as long as this dating websites is all about writing and profiles and pictures. But as soon as you enter into contact like we are doing now, talking together on video, we have already a completely different impression of what the other person is. And you see also, you know, that maybe some mimics or so on, which can hint to something else, and which is not only the shining nice face all the time, you know. So for me, this is an alternative, because it might be that you don't find, as I sure won't find here around, people who are in my, let's say, mindset, or who would be able to understand what I'm up to, you know, or let's say even differently, who would be willing to talk with me about things which I'm interested in. Because, you know, even my friends here, hardly ever I can talk about the things I'm really, really interested in, like integral theory. It's for years that every now and then I give some hints, but not really, you know. So then to think that I find a partner in this surrounding, it's really, I don't know how to do that, you know.
Yeah.
But as the content, internet, as I found Mark first writing about a topic in an integral group. So that was already people where I thought, oh, okay. And when we met, we didn't think about coming together, but that it developed slowly. And then we were on, then it was Skype. We met on Skype then at the end every day. And then he decided to come over for a month, and we figured out if we wanted to be together, and we wanted to be together, and knowing that it's not easy, because in this very first month, we already went through things which normally you do in the first 3 to 4 years of a relationship. But it was clear that we were willing to do that, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now he escaped over the relationship.
Give me an opportunity to something. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe, but it also really, I'm not yet over it. It's 9 months ago, and it was a devastating experience to lose the person where I thought finally the right one, because I was also in serial monogamy with several people, and I always, for me, the men were a means to grow, but in a negative thing normally, in a negative way. And with Mark, it was in a positive way, you know?
Yeah.
So that's really, I'm still very vulnerable often, you know, and start to cry and things like that.
Yeah, so. I can feel that. I'm really sorry for that loss. But what your story is really beautiful, because what I was going to say is it's really important to find someone, you know, somewhere in the neighborhood of your cosmic addresses, Ken Wilber.
Exactly.
Really, you know, I have historically, you know, married or gotten into a relationship with men who were projects, you know. I mean, it's just like, oh, they admired something that they saw in me, and it was, and I took that admiration to be love, and that's not the same thing at all. And you know, so I'm particularly eager to not repeat that.
But we do that too. We women do that too. For me, the men were also projects, you know. What can I get out of that one? For instance, the first marriage, he was 11 years older than me. I was 19. He was 30. He began to earn money, had a BMW. And this was really, really, really inspiring, you know, to be the wife of such a, and then being a wife was really, oh, wow. I mean, only the first year.
So, but, yeah, I mean, it's not an uncommon pattern, you know, it really isn't. But what I'm saying is that we really have a chance to do it differently now, or at least I really hope so. And it's, you know, your story about losing Mark is really tragic. I mean, I feel that. I feel the sadness in it. And as I said, when my relationship ended, it's like I had to face my fear of dying alone. And the fact of the matter is even if you find that person that you want to be with for the rest of your life or their life, one of you will go before the other, you know, and we always are going to have to come back to ourselves and, you know, yes, grieve the loss, you know, but this life is still here and gets to take the richness of that and create whatever is next with it. And maybe that'll be in a relationship, maybe that'll be in creating community in a different way. You know, you don't know what it'll turn into, but it's a gift no matter what. And so to keep creating gifts for, you know, they're gifts of the heart, you know, and to keep creating them in any way, in every way that we can, those are relationships. And that's what I'm really interested in, you know.
And that's wonderful. And that's also, we are almost at the end. I think that is a wonderful note to end with, that the life is giving you gifts, even when the events which are happening are not so optimal, let's say, but they have a gift in it. And I realize that. And even the moment when you are in distress and in uncertainty, it also gives a sort of a gift, because as you said before, the opportunities are opening up, and we have to learn to deal with the uncertainty without shutting down, you know.
Absolutely. So I'd just like to say, you know, one last thing before we end here. So this process has been really, really rich, and I've been tracking it. And as I said, I've been working with my friend, and I've been writing down, you know, what's worked, or what are some of the questions of inquiry that that help bring up, illuminate these patterns that may not be helpful, or, you know, help us bring in what we're really seeking, and, you know, discovering our values and things like that. So I would be very curious to know from your audience if people who are listening to this would find this a useful thing to be put out, you know, I don't know, maybe as a course. There's always in the back of my mind a book, but, you know, I don't know when that'll exactly happen. But I'd love input from anybody that would like to offer it in terms of what they see as possible in this particular body of work. So
that's wonderful. They can write it in the comment stream, either on the website where we are streaming or on YouTube, and they can contact you. Can you share your contact information?
Yes, I can be emailed at pollinate. I have a little hummingbird theme that goes on in my life, but it's POLLIN and the number 8 at gmx.com. Or you can find me on Facebook under Sharona Hana.
So people can connect with you there. And yeah, and maybe you should do a poll or something on Facebook and see what people say. That would also be a good idea.
That could come down line. You know? Sort of like there are so many ways that we can put this into the work. So this is one. So,
yeah, thank you. So at this point, it was a great conversation, and what you, I think, conveyed with so much emphasis and so much enthusiasm is not to give up. It's the best time we have to create something new. And we need only to go into this mindset that we can.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
it's not easy. So if you prefer to sit in your chair and do nothing, you can do that. But if this is bringing happiness, or not, maybe not happiness, but only contentment in some way, I don't think so. You know,
Is it living?
gets
Living is
pretty
enlivening, and
yeah.
you know that's you know we've been given all this extra life, you know, in this stage, and I for one intend to use it. So
Yeah, and I think we are given this extra life because it's needed. I think the world needs elders who gather their wisdom and not just get it into their grave, but give it away to others so that they can, even if maybe the young people don't think they can do it all by themselves, but it's up to us to bring it out and to make us heard and take part in life as best as we can.
absolutely.
And yeah, and part of that is what I'm doing here, talking with people and enjoying to learn more. So yeah, connect with us, and the Conscious Aging series will start again in autumn. As I said, next week will still be dementia seen from an integral perspective, but in German. But if you come there and see the author, we have done the first session in English with a different co-host, and there are different questions. So you can watch this in English. And if you know German, you definitely come and watch the next session, which will be the final session in this series. And then we will start series number 6 in autumn. And you are invited to connect with us. For Conscious Aging, we have an extra newsletter. So I will send out newsletters when I do Conscious Aging only for Conscious Aging, and the rest, the Wisdom Factory newsletters, they will be only for the other series which we have. We have Conversations That Matter, where we cover a whole lot of topics which are about seeing life and living life in a different way. There's also relationships, and I will post this also in the relationships section, because it's also about relationships. And there's ecology, there is growing development, there is integral theory, and many, many things. And then we have the integral chat. And then we have Women Matters, where women come together and talk about topics about how we women can see life in a different way and do something in a different way. And the same thing I have also in German. And with my sister, I wanted to give a legacy about the 50s and a little later. And we started to do a series growing up in post-war Germany, because we are both born in the 50s, and life in the 50s and 60s was really different. And both of us, we had a regret that our parents didn't share with us their lives. So we said, now we go online and we record it. And so our family members, the next generations, they can see how it was. So you are invited to participate in all these things, live as a participant in the conversations, but also then only watching, whatever you prefer, and sign up for the newsletters, okay? See you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for your work, Heidi. Thank you.